Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Imaginary Lines, your favorite podcast, and your favorite co-host, of course. That would be me, Keith Giles. I'm an author of the Jesus On series, and I'm joined by the poet Darrell Epp. And we are going to, I believe, continue our conversation. In the previous episode, we kind of, for the first time, kind of talked about our love for comics and different comic books that we found inspiring, and that was actually fun because it was the first time we've ever disagreed on something. So,
Yeah, very much so.
Yes,
Yeah.
but that's fun. That's actually great. It's fun to do that. And so I think in this episode, Darrell, you wanted to kind of, I took the spotlight probably a lot about talking about All-Star Superman with Grant Morrison, which you did not love as much as I did.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
so I'm going to give you the chance here. You wanted to talk a little bit about your favorite Superman comics.
Yeah. Also, it's funny now that we mention it again, I'm reminded we have to step back at some point and talk about why comics are awesome.
Yeah.
And I think comics are kind of more awesome than film in the sense that if you read like a good comic, you can have an establishing shot showing the Rocky Mountains, the saloon, the inside of the saloon, a close-up of a face, a close-up of a gun, and you can hit the reader with these images in like 2 seconds, where even for the best filmmaker, it would be like a couple of minutes that were like really literal.
Right.
And I would say like comics are a lot like poems, more so than film, in the sense that, cinema is the most literal of narrative forms. And let's say in a comic, you had a panel where in the first panel is a close-up of me, and then in panel 2 is a close-up of me, but now I have a big beard.
Mm.
As soon as you see that, faster than conscious thought, your brain processes this comic and says, oh, this is 2 months later.
Right.
Right. And that's where the magic happens in that gutter, in the gap between the panels.
Yeah.
And, before we had like an alphabet, we had like pictograms, shapes, and, the word for house looked like a house, and language evolves, So the mystery of telling a story with both words and pictures and images, it's really magical. So I'll talk about Superman, and then that actually might tie into what I'd like to talk about all the time about different narrative strategies.
Cool.
And poetry. So basically, what I'm holding here is a comic called DC Showcase Presents Volume 4. And back in the day, about 10 or 15 years ago, DC Comics published all sorts of this because they're sitting on this huge library. Why would you bury a library underground, right? So they printed all these old stories in black and white on the cheapest paper they could find. And when they first started doing this, they sold each one of these for $9.99.
Yeah.
So they said, well, hey, these guys are dead. We don't want to pay them again. Here's like 500 pages of comics for $10.
Yeah.
So this is volume 4. This is volume 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really cool. Marvel does them also, and they're black and white telephone book size reprints of older comics. And if you just want to read those stories and you don't want to, because the problem, of course, is like if you said, hey, I want to go back and read these old comics from the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, you're going to drop a chunk of change to go and buy the individual comics because, they cost anywhere from 10 to 40, 50, sometimes $100 an issue to go and read the original ones again. So it's kind of a gift to a comic book fan or just someone who's curious about some older comics and they just want to read those stories. Yeah, I love those collections. They're really, really cool. And I'm glad that they exist.
Yeah, and the value is unparalleled.
Yeah.
So in this one, for example, it contains a story in which Superman joins the army, and he's able to, and he's assigned kitchen duty, and he can peel potatoes at super speed. And
Of
there's a
course he
story
can.
where he meets Pat Boone, a story where he meets JFK, where he meets Perry Como, where he meets the Beatles. There's a story where it's brought to his attention that Superman has never paid taxes, so he owes a lot of taxes to the government. So he starts salvaging sunken pirate ships to pay off his tax bill according to the international laws of salvage. But then he finds a loophole that all of Americans depend on Superman, so he claims every single American as a dependent.
Oh, there you go.
So he actually doesn't owe tax.
So it's like
cool.
it's like that episode is like creative tax law.
Yeah. And then
awesome.
how Perry White says Great Caesar's ghost.
Yes.
There's one story in here where the ghost of Julius Caesar appears to Perry White and says, "Stop taking my name in vain."
I love it.
Yeah, and the stories are written by Bill Finger, who was the writer for Batman.
Oh
and,
gosh, yes. Have we? Hold on. Have we? I don't want to derail us, but let me put a pin in something. We need to have an episode upcoming talking about Bill Finger and Bob Kane and the origin of Batman as a character and the stories and the comics and things like that. Because there's some stuff, I'm sure you probably know this, but Bob Kane, oh my gosh, that in itself is a huge topic. So we got to come back and talk about that later.
See, I was hoping we could avoid this because
Sorry.
because I have sort of a strange take on this. I think Stan Lee was a bigger scumbag than Bob Kane.
Oh yeah, we could do that too. We could actually talk about Stan Lee as well.
Yeah, and also Will Eisner, who is really revered in the comic book business for creating something called the Spirit.
Yes.
And yeah, it's kind of funny. Like comics are fun to read, but the actual history of the comic business, it's the sleaziest, filthiest industry you can possibly imagine.
Yes, it is.
And there's a great book about the history of comics called Men of Tomorrow by Gerard Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And Gerard Jones was a Green Lantern writer. And in this book, he documents how the comic book business was created as a money laundering enterprise for the mafia.
Oh, now it all makes sense.
That's why comics exist, right?
Yes.
So this book, Men of Tomorrow, has all this dirt on why the comic business started off in the wrong direction and why it's so filthy. And they literally started printing comics because they didn't want to throw out the paper.
Yeah.
And the author of that book is now in prison for child porn.
Uh-huh.
Keeping the whole sleazy theme going.
Let's just keep it going. Yeah. Now, so as an example, this is just a real world example. This was my first kind of like peeling back the layers on the comic book business. When I was in junior high, we moved to El Paso, and I got one of my best friends is my friend Lito Moore, and his father was Tom Moore, and Tom Moore was one of the most popular Archie comics illustrators during the 50s. So in the 50s, if you have an Archie's comic from the 50s, great chance Tom Moore wrote and drew that comic. Now, the reason why you wouldn't know that name is because, and I know this because Lito's dad, Tom, who worked for Archie Comics and worked in the comics industry, told me this is the way it worked. You would get your assignment, right? You'd write the script. Sometimes you would write and illustrate an Archie comic. You come up with the gags, you draw, you pencil and ink the whole thing, and you send it to them, and they will send you a check, which on the back of the check says on the back of the check, when you endorse this check, you are waiving all rights, all creative rights to any characters, any dialogue, even any credit. So Archie Comics, like at least DC and Marvel and some of the other comics, you open the first page and it says, written by, whatever, Chris Claremont, art by John Byrne, whatever. You at least get the credit on the page. But on Archie Comics, famously, they don't. You don't ever know who drew this, who wrote this. So anyway, yeah, I was like, are you kidding me? So this is why even today it's still a problem, like with Marvel and DC, because Marvel now is doing all these movies, and they're introducing all these characters, Deadpool and the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Skrulls and all these characters, but a lot of these characters were created by guys who were like, hey man, all I got was a paycheck. I made a couple $100, but I invented this character, which is now in a movie that made, several $1 billion, and I'm screwed. And this continually has become kind of a thorn in the side, where even to the point where some of these creators who created these characters, like the guy that created Thanos, is it Jim Starlin? I think it's Jim Starlin,
it is.
Right?
Yeah.
Jim Starlin did an interview recently, talking about, he created Thanos and he made it like, maybe $500. And he's pretty pissed, right? He's kind of bitter, as you would imagine, that this character that I created is now making Marvel billions of dollars and I'm standing here in the corner. And now they get a little credit at the end. If you watch the credits, it's special thanks to Jim Starlin, blah, blah, blah. But hey, man, you can't cash that. You can't spend that. So yeah, that's the comics industry has always kind of screwed the creators, the guys that came up with these characters. And now this takes us quickly to like Stan Lee. Stan Lee was a creator, he was a writer, but eventually he became the editor as well. And once he became the editor, he played right along with that same game, and quite famously took a whole lot of credit for creating characters he did not create. Captain America is one. I think the only one he legitimately could say he created was Spider-Man. But even the other characters like Captain America, he did not create. Iron Man, he did not create. Fantastic Four, he sort of co-created with Jack Kirby, although Jack Kirby and I think even Steve Ditko, actually, I think Stan Lee just had sort of names, but Jack and Steve sort of like rounded out like, well, what are their names? What are their powers? What are their backgrounds? Like they actually came up with all the substantial stuff that makes, Ben Grimm the Thing and all those kind of things. But Stan Lee would constantly take the credit, like he alone created those characters and everything, and even those stories, because it was a very collaborative process. So yeah, it's just kind of a scummy place to work, which is why a lot of those guys, even if they're really good, they can't wait to get out of it. Like I want to publish my novel, or I'm going to go somewhere like an independent creator where I can create my own characters and own my characters and things like that.
Well, I guess there's a few things going on there. First off, the thing about the stamp that would put on the back of the checks, first off, that wouldn't be allowed in any other country. Like when you buy a paperback written by J.G. Ballard, on the indicia page, it would say the moral rights of this author have been asserted.
Yes.
And if you talk to people from other countries about all this stuff, it just makes America sound totally insane, right?
Yeah.
Like when people go to America, the first thing they notice is like all of those crazy late night ads for cheap drugs with those huge disclaimers, and people worrying about healthcare when in other countries it's just not like that, right?
Right.
So and the funny thing about the stamp in the back of the check, more people now questioning that, saying no, that's that's some BS that you didn't have to go along with. And just recently, a few weeks ago, Steve Ditko's nephew's son gave to Marvel a notice of termination, saying Stan Lee said Doctor Strange was Ditko's idea. I'm one of the heirs. I'm saying you don't have the rights to use Doctor Strange anymore as of whenever.
Whoa.
Right? So basically, the way the notice of termination works, It basically will most likely work out to like a lease where like I give you $10 million, you sign a non-disclosure act, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And Marvel Comics responded to Pat Ditko's action in part by suing Stan Lee's brother, Larry Lieber, to try to head him off at the pass of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
For Ant-Man or Paste Pot Pete or whatever.
Paste Pot Pete, that's a great one.
Yeah, and the thing about Jim Starlin, it's kind of funny. Like all those '70s guys were guys who wanted to be artists but weren't good enough, so they started fanzines and then became writers.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Starlin, when he created Thanos, he had this idea where he wanted to do a character that was a ripoff of Metron, created by Jack Kirby.
Yeah,
and then
LDC.
Roy Thomas, who's also a parasite, said to him, "If you're going to steal big.
Right.
Rip off Darkseid."
Yes.
So Stan Lee's Thanos is just a ripoff of Jack Kirby's Darkseid, and now Jim Starlin, Crimea River, you know.
Yeah.
Also, Stan Lee. Maybe I'll skip that topic for the moment. And basically,
I'll come back
in
to
comics, their version of the Oscars is called the Eisner Awards, named after Will Eisner.
Right.
And Will Eisner was the biggest piece of trash you can possibly find, who was a lying, thieving scumbag who lied under oath. And people revere this comic, The Spirit, and he was one of these guys, kind of like Joe Simon, who looked around the comics biz and realized very quickly the best place to be in this game is in management.
Yes.
So they quickly jumped ship. So basically what happened is the Spirit, which is famous for being so innovative, blah, blah, blah.
I can see you're impressed.
It's crazy. He would pay Wally Wood, Bob Powell, Jules Pfeiffer, Jerry Grandinetti, Lou Fine, the smartest, best artists in the world, to draw Spirit stories and write them, and then he would put his own name on it.
This is what Bill Finger did. Not Bill Finger. This is what Bob Kane did.
Sure.
Bob Kane did the exact same thing, where he would hire unknown artists to draw Batman and put his name on it. Have I told this story before?
No. But
can I tell this real quick? Can I tell this part real quick?
Yeah.
This part is insane to me. So it was an interview I was reading online, and it was another artist who knew Bob Kane, and he was kind of talking about how he couldn't believe that Bob Kane would do this. When he found out that Bob Kane was doing this, he couldn't believe it. And he went to Bob Kane's house, and he was telling him, he asked him, "Aren't you embarrassed? I mean, aren't you ashamed for people to think you're drawing these Batman comics, but you're hiring these other people to do it?" And he goes, "Oh, no, everyone does it. It's the industry." And he goes, "But I want to show you what I'm really excited about." Took him into his studio, and there was all these clown paintings. He had painted, there was like a room was filled with these paintings of clowns. And he goes, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be huge. I'm going to have a gallery showing, and we're going to sell these paintings. It's going to be great." Well, a few years later, the same guy is talking to somebody else in the industry, and the guy goes, "Hey, have you heard about Bob Kane?" He goes, "What?" He goes, "Oh, he's being sued." He goes, "I can't believe he's being sued. Those artists knew that, what was happening." When he goes, "Oh no, not the comic stuff. It's some lady who paints clowns." And he was like, "Wait a minute. Those paintings he showed me in his studio, those weren't his paintings either." And he was also paying a woman to paint clowns so he could put his name on the clown paintings and then do a showing in a gallery saying that he painted those stupid clowns. Like, basically, that was his plan. His way of doing art was hiring other people, putting your name on it, and then that's how you work as an artist.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I'm not sure that bothers me too much. It's like, my hatred for Stan Lee is just like nothing can rival that. And basically, it's like the old joke, what did Stan Lee do without Jack Kirby? And the answer is a comic called Stripperella. And later, an actual stripper sued Stan Lee and said, "You stole my story," right?
Yeah.
So it's just filthy. And the thing about Bob Kane and Batman, I say good for him. What happened is Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster go to DC Comics and they give them Batman in exchange for $130.
I mean, Superman, right?
Yes, yeah,
Superman.
yeah. They sold the rights to Superman for $130,
Yeah.
and then shortly thereafter, Schuster's vision deteriorated, where he wasn't able to work as an artist at all, pretty much, and they spent the rest of their lives having pretty sad lives. And when the Superman movie came out, Jerry Siegel said he put a magical curse on Superman and on Christopher Reeve.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And he cursed them all.
And it worked.
Yeah. So those two guys were actual human beings who lived in really reduced circumstances, and it's a really horrible story. So then, after that, Bob Kane goes to DC Comics and signs away the rights to Batman. And then he goes home, and his dad was an actual lawyer. So Bob Kane goes back to DC Comics with his mommy and daddy.
Yeah.
And then they lie and say, "Oh, guess what? When I signed that document with you yesterday, I forgot to tell you, I'm actually a minor." And like he was 18, and he lied and said he was 16.
Oh, wow.
So because I'm a minor, I didn't have the right to do that. So talk to my dad, the lawyer. F you.
Yep. Yeah.
So good for him there, or whatever.
Good for him. Yeah.
You know, and
yeah, when you realize, like you were saying, the comic book industry was so slimy. Like, again, no other industry could get away with this. It's basically a rigged game from the beginning.
And it couldn't happen in Canada or England.
Yeah.
You know,
I want to say too, this is a little bit off from that too, but when I briefly, and I mentioned last time, I wrote for Comic Book Resources, the website. Yeah. I interviewed artists and like Bill Sienkiewicz and all these guys I really liked, David Mack, some really great artists. And anyway, and also got to know them and all that kind of stuff. And then I did my own comics for a bit and was sort of like thinking about, hey, I wonder if I could do this. It'd be fun to kind of just do this a little bit. But you know what I realized by doing those comics with some of my friends who were artists was, first of all, on the production side of things, I mean, as a writer, it's much easier to sit and write, to come up with an idea and write out a script. Okay. I mean, it's work. I'm not saying it's a cakewalk, but I could probably write a good comic script in, let's say, let's say a week, right? I plot it out, I outline it, I think about the panels and how I want it to flow. Okay. And I write it all out, the dialogue and everything. I write a good script in a week and I send it to my artist. It'll take that artist at least a month or more to draw that script. It's so much work. And especially if you're a good artist and you want to do a good job and you want to create art that's really compelling and, moves you and is like, wow, this is great. It's not just stick figures and just a quick, thumbnail. Yeah. It's so much more work. And yet in the comics industry, comic book writers are paid double what the artist is paid. And to me, that was a shock. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, the writer is getting paid double what someone like John Byrne or Jim Lee or Jack Kirby is getting paid. Like, what? That's the reason why people buy the comic, because the art is great, right? You look at the art. I don't know if it's true for everybody, but I think I could safely say the majority of comic book fans follow artists more than writers. I mean, there's a couple of writers that I follow, but if the art is really bad, it's kind of like, I don't know if I want to buy that comic or not, even if I love that writer. But if I love an artist, I'm going to buy everything they do because I love their art, And so to find out that, again, these artists that are pretty much driving the business and selling the book are getting paid half of what the writer's getting paid, that was like also another injustice. I just thought, dude, that's upside down. The writer should, the artist should be getting paid way more than the writer, or at least let's say make it even, but don't, don't undercut the artist when they're just killing themselves. And I know some of these guys that are artists, they spend hours and hours and hours on these panels and stuff, creating great art, and then they get this meager paycheck.
Well, it's funny. Like, I wish I'd been taking notes when you were saying all that, but because I really have to push back first on about this whole idea about, yeah, I'll write a comic script and give it to my artist. That is a really nutty American idea, and comics exist and flourish in other places, and it's not like that.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is exploitation, where first off, it's pretty obvious that all the best comics in the history of the universe were made in a situation where the writer and the artist was the same person. Okay. Chester Gould.
I don't know. That might be another thing we could debate. I would say, yeah, the writer artist combo is typically the best. I mean, I can think of examples of that.
Okay.
Like Frank Miller.
Okay.
Right.
The writer artist combo was invented because of exploitation.
Okay. I see
the best comics. Okay. The best comics are where the writer and artist is the same person. Right. Chester Gould, Jack Kirby, Peter Bagg, Frank King, Winsor McKay, Harold Gray, Paul Pope.
Yeah, Paul Pope, Frank Miller.
Yeah. Okay, so then what happens is Jack Kirby was writing comics in 1938. He was writing comics until he died in 1993. Okay, Stan Lee, he literally was only there because of nepotism, right. Because he was related to Martin Goodman, and if it wasn't for Martin Goodman not wanting to hear his wife bitching about little Stan being out of a job, he would have stopped making comics in 1958, and this whole thing wouldn't have happened. We'd be all better off, right? So then there's this debate about what did Stan do, what did Jack do, and it's all ridiculous. Yeah. Because first off, there's a mountain of evidence and quotes from my witnesses saying Jack did it all, and Stan just stole money out of his pocket. But even if you back up the train further than that, the evidence is in front of your eyes. Comics are stories told with words and pictures. Yeah. Okay. If an artist creates a bunch of pages and gives them to you, and then after he's finished telling a narrative in the comics form, and here's a guy pointing at Ant-Man, and you had a word balloon saying, look, there's Ant-Man.
Yeah.
And you call yourself the writer. The reason Stan Lee created those boxes saying written by Lee, drawn by so-and-so, was to steal money from the writer. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the scumbags in the 70s, like Roy Thomas and all these people, said, that's a good racket. Why not have the artist make the comic first, and then, which is also plotting and writing. It's like, Buster Keaton, he wrote one of the best screenplays ever for the best movie ever called The General. There's no dialogue because it's a silent movie. It doesn't mean he didn't write it.
Right.
Like he wrote it,
yes.
And it's funny. There's an issue of S.H.I.E.L.D. by Jim Steranko where for the first 3 pages, it's Nick Fury climbing a rope.
Yes.
And Martin Goodman said, why should I have to pay Steranko a writing fee for those pages? Because there's no dialogue on it.
Right.
How stupid is that? Right.
Well, that's also just a misunderstanding that writing is just dialogue. Because obviously when.
Oh yeah, but now this whole thing about the writer and the artist, it's about exploitation, and that's all it is. And Howard Chaykin has written about this quite a bit, where he says, ever since Alan Moore came out and ruined everything, Howard Chaykin will get these scripts in the mail on a job he's doing, where the guy says, here's like 1 square panel, 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and fit the Battle of Leningrad into this one panel.
Right.
And then Howard Chaykin says, hey kid, there's only one Alan Moore in the world and you're not him, right? And remember, Evan Dorkin was talking a while ago about how he actually got a script in the mail where the script said pages 13, 14, 15, fight scene, make it look awesome.
Great.
Right? So thanks for coming out, right? So it's like, who needs these people, right? Like, they didn't need them, and it was about exploitation, you know? And just to get back to, like, Will Eisner, there was one time Jim Steranko was giving a lecture where he's going, ooh la la, the spirit was so awesome. And he broke down this one spirit story, bit by bit, saying about how innovative, blah, blah, blah it was. And then when the lecture was over, someone came up to him and said, oh yeah, guess what? That story was ghost drawn by Jerry Grandinetti, who did a lot of great work for Creepy and Eerie and all this stuff. Yeah. So Jim Strang was like, yeah, you got me good there. That's great, right? And and all of the stories that by Will Eisner's spirit that people remember most fondly were drawn by Grandinetti and written by Jules Feiffer. And Jules Feiffer is still making comics today. And he wrote the screenplay for the movie Carnal Knowledge with Jack Nicholson, directed by Mike Nichols. He's written dozens of books, dozens of novels, graphic novels. He's a writer.
Yeah.
You know, but then you know, Will Eisner would put his signature on the front page and say, "Here's $35." You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Anyway, boy, that was a long tangent, but from your Superman, I derailed us a little bit. So do you want to go back to...
The stories in here are written by Bill Finger. They're also written by Jerry Siegel, who was awesome, a great writer. Each of these writers had different strengths. Like, it's kind of funny. One guy in the comic book business who wasn't a scumbag was Archie Goodwin.
Yeah.
And anyone who ever met him said he was just a saint. And when he was editing the Warren mags, when he had a script with a haunted house, he would actually put it aside for Jerry Grandinetti because he knew Jerry Grandinetti was so great with architecture.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool, right? Yeah. So since Siegel knew so much about loss and suffering, he always had Superman stories that involved loss, broken dreams, nostalgia, things like that. What if? And then a lot of the stories in these books are also written by Edmund Hamilton, who I mentioned before, who was married to the person who wrote The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Like actual, like real science fiction people.
Mm-hmm.
So this book features the story called The Showdown Between Luthor and Superman. And you'll see on the cover, Luthor and Superman are boxing.
Oh, there you go.
Because that's how men settle their disagreements.
They're in like a corral.
Yeah, on a different planet.
Bare-chested boxing.
Yeah, so also one thing that's kind of annoying, it seems like in the modern age, Lex Luthor is portrayed as like some sort of tycoon or billionaire CEO in a suit or something.
He's a genius, yeah.
Right, but I mean, in modern times, they've really played up the idea that he's like a filthy rich guy or something.
Right.
When the real Lex Luthor is a nutty professor and a mad scientist types.
Yeah.
Right, and it's kind of funny when like people say, why do superheroes wear their underwear outside their pants? LOL. Right. Yeah. It's like because that's what acrobats do, and they're based on acrobats.
Yeah.
Like, look at that Burt Lancaster movie, Trapeze. Like, that's what they do. Yeah. We're talking 1938.
Yeah.
Right? And Lex Luthor isn't a billionaire. He's a mad scientist. Like, that's what was in the air in 1938. Right?
Right.
So
but
basically...
But they have changed that since then, right? Now all the modern costumes, that are updated Superman and Batman, all those characters, and they don't have their underwear outside their bodies anymore.
Well, again, as I said, when you start talking about the 21st century, that's where I kind of zone out there. So, so basically, kids, what happens here? You'll see Superman, Lex Luthor, is sitting in his jail cell. Okay.
Yeah.
That's him sitting
in a long feud.
Yeah, sitting in his jail cell. And he says, I'm locked up here in this cage while Superman is free to rule the world, to rove the world. The man who put me here because he's really jealous of my genius, which I use for crime. Then he strokes his chin thoughtfully and says, it's time the long feud between Superman and me was settled. One way or another, I'm going to have it out with him. Once and for all. So he goes to the machine shop in the prison and built a tank with these giant battering ram arms.
No one's going to notice that he's working on this, right?
Well, basically what happened was there was a lathe broken in the machine shop. So he said, hey, Warden, I'll fix it for you. He's like, really, Lex? Thanks, bro.
You're a great guy.
When the Warden wasn't looking, he built a giant tank that shattered the walls of the prison.
I love
so
it.
He breaks out of prison, as you'll see here.
Oh, yeah. That's a great panel, right? Dude. Oh, my gosh. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. And Chris Swan is perfect, right? And then 2 panels later, after the prison jailbreak, Lex Luthor takes control of every TV channel on Earth and uses this to broadcast a message to Superman.
A challenge, right?
In which he says, Superman has never yet dared meet me man to man on even terms. I challenge Superman to a fair fight without his superpowers to help him.
Mm.
And then it shows people watching TV at the Daily Planet, and then they're watching a boxing match, and then Lex Luthor breaks in and says, Luthor speaking, notice, everybody, that in this heavyweight bout, the fighters are evenly matched. But Superman is afraid to meet me on even terms. And then so Superman changes and says, well, he's got a point there.
Yeah.
And he says, if my career as Superman is to continue, I must accept the challenge. If people thought that I was afraid, they might lose faith in me as a defender of the weak and oppressed. So then Superman goes on TV and says, Luthor, wherever you are, I accept your challenge to battle me without superpowers. Meet me tomorrow on Mount Como, and I guarantee you safe conduct. So they meet on top of this mountain, and then Superman says, okay, great, you got it. I found a planet which has a different sun. It's far away, and this sun will not give me magic powers, so we'll be even. So let's get in our little rocket ship and just sail away. So they do. So they go to this planet, and they have a boxing match where they just stand there taking shots.
Yeah, so I got to say, the logistics of this story is pretty impressive. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So now they have to get in a rocket ship and fly to another planet so they can have a boxing match.
Yeah. So they have a boxing match, and then Lex Luthor is pretty good because he's been pumping iron in prison.
Can I ask Can I ask something? Is it televised? Yeah. Because people on Earth will just have to take their word for who wins the fight. Is it televised so they can watch it?
Actually, before they left, Lex Luthor said, if you beat me fair and square without superpowers, I will go back to prison.
Oh, got it. Okay, good. There you go.
And if I beat you, you have to stay on this empty planet forever.
And never come back.
Being lonely.
Whoa.
Yes.
Damn.
Okay. So they're trading shots. Lex Luthor gives Superman a black eye. And then Superman says, he's going to murder me. But I've got a mental block. I'm so used to being invulnerable, I can't help feeling that if I even punched him once, the punch would kill him. So he's beating up Superman. Superman says, what a fool I was to accept Luthor's challenge. And then Superman gets it together, forces himself to punch hard, and gives Lex Luthor an uppercut and knocks him out. So the battle's kind of a draw, but he does knock Lex out. And then Superman walks back to the spaceship to get some water because he's thirsty. When he turns around, Lex Luthor has disappeared and hidden himself inside the giant cactus forest, where there's cactus that are as tall as skyscrapers.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Dude, that's sweet.
So they have a chase through this giant cactus forest, and then it reminds Superman of a cactus forest on Krypton, which helps him get out. And then uh, uh, Lex Luthor has a heat-seeking weapon to track Superman. So Superman starts a fire to deke him out, and then a terrible sandstorm comes that where they both have to seek shelter from the sandstorm. And during the sandstorm, when the sandstorm is over, Superman for 2 pages has a vision that he's back on Krypton, and then at the end of it realizes that it's a mirage, and that his whole world is really dead.
Yeah.
And then he goes looking for water. He can't find any water. And then Lex Luthor goes in the other direction and walks into a city. He finds a city there. And it's kind of like a city that used to be sophisticated technologically, but now it's regressed. So Lex Luthor says, "This city is a relic of a great past. This must have once been a great scientific race, but perhaps a great war eons ago wiped out their civilization, and they've returned to the Stone Age. And now they're all suffering, trying to find ways to get water. And they're being attacked by giant vultures. And then Lex Luthor, with his scientific genius, finds a way to repel these giant killer birds. So these people are like, wow, thanks for helping us." And they're grateful because he helps to save their crops so these people don't starve. So then he invents the universal translator so he can talk to them in the following panel.
I was gonna say, all this happens in the same comic?
Yes.
This is crazy. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Wow,
It's
there's
12
a lot going on.
Yeah. Okay.
This is like a whole season of like a TV series. In like
I know,
one.
and that's the thing. Everything is so puffed up, full of hot air now. It's like when Brian Michael Bendis writes Daredevil, and it's like 12 graphic novels, and you're like, wow, back when comics were 35 cents, Frank Miller and Klaus Janson could have packed that much story into 3 35-cent comics.
Right, but Brian Bendis has great dialogue.
What's that? There's static on this line.
Like you're breaking up. You're breaking up.
Yeah. So then they have a party for Lex Luthor, and this decadent civilization wants to crown him king. And they say, "Lex Luthor, you are a wise man, like our forefathers. You will use the ancient wisdom we have forgotten to help us, great Luthor." And Lex Luthor says, "This is strange. I've never had a crowd cheer for me before, and I like it." So these people tell him, "We know you're a genius. We know you're the Messiah.
Yep.
We need water." So he starts building these huge machines to give them water. And the one place they have water is from the runoff of one single mountain. So he builds giant robot dredges to build a canal so they have water, which takes him a couple hours. And then by the afternoon, he says, "My robots can't find any other source of water in this planet. Yet I can't let these people down when they think I'm a hero." So then Superman walks into town. And because he has no powers, he just spent a couple days walking, right?
Yeah.
So Superman appears out of the desert and says, "I followed your tracks. We can finish this fight." And the people of this village, of this once great metropolis, say, "Is this stranger your friend, oh great Luthor?" And Luthor says, "No, he's my enemy." So these people go to beat up Superman because he's the enemy of their Messiah, Luthor. And then they say, "If he's the enemy, he must be evil. Let's kill him." And then Lex Luthor says, no, let go of him. I have promised to fight him on even terms in one-on-one combat."
Wow.
So then Lex Luthor says to Superman, "To keep us on even terms, I'll have these people show you a set of their ancient inventions. You can study them tonight and figure out how to use them, as I will use my set of ancient technology to fight you." And then Superman says, agreed, we'll duel tomorrow. So then Superman starts researching this ancient library of this advanced civilization that went extinct way back when. And he says, these ancient inventions do have terrific powers, and Luthor is a great scientist and will know how to make weapons out of them. I've got to be prepared. So he's preparing to meet Lex Luthor in battle. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor, on the other part of town, is feverishly trying to find a way to bring these poor people water.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's almost like in the right conditions, Lex Luthor could have been a hero.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, now, real quick, there's actually a scene like that in All-Star Superman, the Grant Morrison one that we talked about last episode, where Superman is trying to explain to Luthor. It's like I think it's a conversation. It's sort of like, because Luthor is so fixated on because of his hatred for Superman, he's put all of his energy, all of his intellect into opposing Superman. Whereas if Superman hadn't been there, if Superman had never existed, Luthor could have been humanity's great savior. He could have actually focused that energy and that intellect and that creativity towards actually solving, like in this comic, right? Solving all these problems in the world. But instead of doing that, he can't do that because he hates Superman so much. He's obsessed. Yeah. And that obsession prevents him from doing any good in the world, right?
You know, that reminds me, one time I was working in a warehouse and I was having problems with a lady. So I was talking to my colleagues, and this one janitor there said, yes, brother, you're right. All women are nothing but dirty, filthy whores. You should treat them like trash because that's all they are. They're trash. And I'm like, yeah, preach it, brother. And then he said, I was married once. She stole my car. She stole my dog. I hope that whore burns in hell. I'm like, yeah. When was this? And he says, 1993. I'm like, what? 1993? You've defined your whole existence since 1993 in hating this lady who doesn't even remember your name.
Right.
What a waste of time.
Yeah.
So that kind of scared me straight, and want to be a good person, because if you don't, it just doesn't work. You know, it just sucks, right?
Yeah.
So if so it's like you should always think like when you're old and you die, you want people to miss you, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you want that to happen, you should be a nice guy today, you know?
That's right. So
I'm like, man, don't be like that guy.
Yeah. Now this is a fascinating story. I mean, I've never heard this story that you're talking about, so it's kind of great. It's almost like sympathy for Lex Luthor.
It's the greatest story ever. And when you talk to Grant Morrison and mention this to him, he will be right there down with it. Like he has this stuff memorized.
Yes, okay? He does. Yes, he does.
Yeah. So Superman is in his lab saying, I must invent a weapon to crush Lex Luthor. And Lex Luthor is out in the fields building giant cranes and boring machines with giant flipper arms, saying, my robots could find no other water than the waning supply that feeds the mountain. It will disappoint these people terribly. I won't tell them until after my duel with Superman. Next day, in an ancient arena, Luthor faces Superman for a final showdown. And in the stadium, there's thousands of people cheering for Luthor, and they say, crush your evil enemy, great Luthor. We're all cheering for you. So then Luthor has a machine to create an anti-gravity tornado to knock Superman off his feet. Luthor begins the duel by selecting a unique device from his stockpile of weapons. Superman says, that's an anti-gravity tornado he's released at me. I'll counter it fast by creating a bigger one with the same type of instrument. So they battle, so these two tornadoes start fighting each other. Then the tornado whips Superman up into the air, but then Superman's tornado starts threatening Luthor. So he says, this isn't working out. So they just turn off the machine and say, tornadoes, they kind of canceled each other out. So they go at it again with like guns that shoot out miniature suns. And also Edmund Hamilton, married to the lady who wrote Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
He was writing science fiction stories in the 40s with lightsabers.
Yes.
Yeah. So then again, these weapons cancel each other out. So then Lex Luthor, he builds a robot bloodhound, and sicks this robot metal dog on Superman, and it's about to tear out his heart, Superman's throat. And Superman says, "Its strength is tremendous, and if its jaws reach my throat, it'll all be over. It must be powered by a self-contained battery. If my hands can only find the control panel." Then he rips out the wires on this killer robot dog to deactivate the thing. And then Lex Luthor says, "Your cleverness has saved you so far, but I can still use my bare hands." So they go back to fighting with their bare hands. And Lex Luthor is strangling Superman. And he's about to kill Superman. And the people of the city say, "Luthor is winning. And when he's won, he'll find us more of the water he promised us." And then Lex Luthor, as he's killing Superman, hears this. And he says, "They don't know that I can't find them more water." And then he stops. And then when he stops, Superman punches Lex Luthor out and knocks him out. And Superman, who's an idiot, says, "I thought he had me, but he suddenly weakened, I guess." And then Lex Luthor says, "I give up, Superman. I admit I'm beaten, and I will go back to Earth with you to go to prison." So Superman's like, "Okay." So they get back in their spaceship and start flying away. And the people say, "You won't forget your promise to deliver water to us. Will you, oh great Luthor?" And Lex says, "No, I won't forget." And then as their spaceship is going into orbit, Lex Luthor says to Superman, he says, "Here's the deal. These people need water. I can't get it. You can. There's a planet over here that's covered in ice. Slice off some big glaciers, throw it at this planet so they have water."
Wow.
So then Superman says, "Lex, if it will help those people, I'll do it, even if it makes them think I'm a villain."
Wow.
So they go to this planet. Superman picks up a glacier, throws it at the dying desert world, and says, "Lex, I can activate your big robots there by my X-ray vision, and they'll build canals like those on Mars." Sure.
Of course.
To bring the water all over the desert planet. And Lex Luthor says, "Thank you, Superman." And then Superman says, "Luthor, did you deliberately let me beat you so that with my superpowers I could keep your promise to those people?" And Lex, and now on this planet he's wearing a parka because it's an Arctic planet, like he just packed a parka in the van.
Sure, we got it in the back, yeah.
So Lex says, "Ridiculous. What makes you think such a thing? You beat me fair and square." And then to himself he thinks, he guessed my motive in losing the duel.
Wow.
But I'll never admit to him that I went soft. So then the people on the planet rejoice and praise Luthor when they see the glacier coming, and they get this, when they get water, so the famine is avoided. And then the last panel, which you can see here,
yeah,
Superman goes and visits Lex Luthor in his prison cell. And he says, "I took this photo through a super telescope in my fortress. It should interest you." And it's a photo of this distant world. And on this world, they have raised a giant statue to their messiah, Lex Luthor. And Lex Luthor says, "A giant statue of me on the one world where I'm a hero. Somewhere out there are people who love me. It was worth coming back to prison for this."
Wow. Damn. I gotta say, man, That is a pretty awesome story, all in a single comic book. Holy moly. So, wow, man, that's shocking because it's not the typical cartoon. We talk about cartoon caricatures, right? Of, oh, foiled again. Those, if it wasn't for those kids, I would have, like that kind of, very one-dimensional look at a villain. That, man, what to talk about a character study of Lex Luthor. All of a sudden, I have a lot of respect. Like Lex Luthor is true to his word. He has character.
No,
Wow, it's like there's so much depth to Luthor there in that story. That's a Luthor story more than a Superman story.
because that story was written by a professional science fiction novelist.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's so funny when you say it it's like Grant Morrison saying, "Don't ask where Batman gets the gas for the Batmobile."
Right.
It's like if you hear about Superman impersonating Pat Boone at the Valentine's Day party, and you think, "Oh, that's corny. You weren't tall enough for this ride." Like you don't get it, right? Yeah. And it's very much like when you read Homer, where it's like, "Oh, we're on the battlefield. We're in the bedroom. We're in the underworld. We're in the land of the dead," right? This is realist. This is fantasy. This is action. This is theology, right? Yeah. Just like don't ask questions, just buckle up and go along, right? And I find these books very inspirational for my own books, very much like John Cheever, where I love it when the narrator, like we've discussed before, really grabs hold of you, like when, like the famous first line of Rothschild's Fiddle, 1984, like we've discussed, where that's the narrator saying to you, "This is my show, take it or leave it."
Yeah.
And if you're going to read John Cheever and not get the way the narrative jumps around and say, "Hey, I thought this was an adult drama. It feels more like a grim fairy tale."
Yeah.
This is what's going on, right? No. I'm the man, right? Just follow along, right? And the goal is to make a story like this where it's your own world. It's like when you watch a movie by David Cronenberg, whether it's from 1975 or 2005, you're in his town.
Yeah.
Or like Polanski or Kurosawa, these people, you see a moment of their movies and like, "Oh, that's him, buckle up," right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's their world with their rules. And that story, it's not even a full comic. It's 14 pages. And then the rest of the comic was a backup story about Elongated Man or something.
Right. Yeah. They always had backup stories. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Edmund Hamilton would write a story like that every Friday for years as a gag while he was writing science fiction novels during the day.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, it's so great. Yeah, I think okay, so you've given me a deeper appreciation for those older Superman comics because I never really got into them as a kid. But man,
well, I'm just saying if you can find this book, it will really inspire you and your own writing.
Yeah, it's great.
And the main thing here is that it contains possibly the greatest story, which is Superman Captive of the Red Sun, which, I'm not sure if I have time to enthuse about it or what the plan is, but like I'm telling you, it's like 500 pages of stories, like I just told you, where they're so well crafted by pros, by professionals, right?
Yeah.
There's no where there's really motor, and they really do have this like internal consistency to them of like a short story by Borges or Calvino or Cheever or a grim fairy tale.
Yeah.
And they're really beautiful, and you'll be reading them, and if you just want to marvel at the ingenuity of the narrative or the imagination of the ideas coming at you, you can. But then when the story's over, you'll be like, "Wait a minute, why am I crying?"
Right. Right.
Why am
You got me.
why am
Yeah.
I so haunted by this? And it's because Superman is about loneliness and loss.
Yeah. 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 See, this is for me one of the things that when if you kind of boil it down, the whole superhero thing. Um, yeah, it is. It is. It's a bit of a combination of things, right? It's a bit of loneliness, being an outcast, not fitting in, being a misfit, but also at the same time being having a heroism within yourself or a love for other people within yourself that's so great that you would even risk your life to save those people that don't understand you and hate you and think you're horrible. Like, so for example, like that's what makes Spider-Man so great to me is that um, he's a kid, first of all. He's got these powers. He's trying to go to school, do his homework, pass his classes, make sure Aunt May doesn't find out. He wants to go. He wants, to get the attention of Gwen Stacy, um, and fall in love. But at the same time, he's got to save New York from all these different people. At the same time, the editor of the biggest newspaper in New York City's front page telling him telling everybody he's a criminal, he's a crook, he's a menace to society and all these things, and yet he doesn't give up. He doesn't stop doing that. Right. That's one of the things I loved about this. This is a little bit off from the comics, but there's a TV show. One of the few, I think, television shows, superhero television shows, was The Flash, that I thought was great and did a great job, at least the first couple of seasons. I think after the first couple of seasons, it just started repeating the same formula over and over again. It's too ridiculous. It just got ridiculous. But in the first couple of seasons, the Flash TV series is great because quite often the character, Barry Allen, will get to a place where he's got some powers and there's some great thing that's happening, some villain with some even greater abilities than he has. And he knows he's not fast enough. He knows he's not strong enough. He knows he's probably going to die, trying and failing to save, his city from this evil, but he has to try. It's that something within him that just says, well, I can't not try. I got to at least give it a shot, right? And of course, at the last second, he manages to somehow pull it off. And it's that picture of this person, it's giving us a glimpse of someone. So again, it's not about their powers. You know what I mean? It's what makes them special isn't, hey, I can run really fast, or I'm really strong, or I can fly, or I can shoot laser beams out of my eyes, or whatever it happens to be. If that's all it is, if it's just some guy with some powers, there's no story there. There's nothing interesting there. There has to be the real thing that sets that character apart has to be that with or without the powers, they would risk their life, to stop the bad guy and save the city. And I love that. I love that that kind of sort of character study about this person, this human being, or this, someone we can identify with. Because then what it does is it inspires within all of us it should anyway, inspire within us that same thing. Like, hey, I don't have powers. I find myself also in a place where I'm misunderstood. People don't get me. Some people don't like me, whatever. I have a boss that's a jerk. But am I willing to do the right thing, even if I might fail, even if I might look stupid, or even if I might do it and no one gives me the credit for it, right? But would I still do it? I love that kind of stuff. And I think that to me is one of the things I love about some of the greatest superhero characters in comics, when it touches on that kind of a thing.
See, it's kind of funny. Like, when you talk about heroism, that's kind of a bit of a red flag for me, in the sense that when you were talking about, like, I think it's interesting when, like, Flash, for a long time, he wasn't sure if he should tell Iris West about his condition. And for me, that was interesting because every guy, when he meets a girl, he feels like saying, I'm actually, this, I'm not sure I'm feel confident telling you about all my, all these parts of me, right? And there's a lot of times when good comics from back in the day actually do kind of haunt you because they mirror these humiliations that everyone does have. It's just done through a funhouse mirror, so it's kind of easier to swallow. And that's how it gets under the radar, which is really cool. And then the thing about heroism and superheroes, that's one thing where I agree with Alan Moore, where I think looking for superheroes to be heroes or be inspired by them is it seems kind of fascist and creepy to me. And the whole idea about, oh, wow, Superman, he did something heroic, that should inspire me to be heroic. I'm like, you should read about my dad. Like, he's a much better hero than Superman, like in that regard, So, actually, hold that thought.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious where you would go with that, because like if you don't think if it's not looking at superheroes as sort of surrogate, examples for us to bring a heroism within ourselves. If heroism isn't the point of a superhero character, what is the point of it? If it's not to humanize that hero, or if it's not to humanize the hero, or to heroize the average guy, what is it?
Humiliation. If you read the Flash stories from 1959 to 1969, written by John Broome, you'll find out that superheroes are not about heroism, they're about humiliation, where what happens is, and again, they're like the story we just went through, 12 pages of mind-blowing psychedelic trippiness. There'll be a story where the Flash wakes up and he has a big giant head, and when he goes out to buy eggs, people point at him and laugh. And it turns out Mr. Freeze wanted revenge. He has to invent the debiggulator ray to make his head go back to normal and all this stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Or he'll wake up and he weighs 1,000 pounds and people fat shame him.
Right. Or he's an old man because he's accelerated and now he's old and
and he has a big beard.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And
I've seen that one.
Yeah. Okay. Now the thing is, these comics ideally are not for adults; they're for kids. And the thing is, when the kids were reading these comics, they themselves were growing hair in new, strange places.
Right.
Their physical development wasn't matching their mental development. They were having certain bodily things happen at inconvenient times, like blushing or whatever else. Being a young person does involve a lot of humiliation as your body goes through physical changes.
Yeah.
And no one wants to read about that because it's too on the nose. But it's okay to read about, and like we've all had dreams about going back to high school and we're naked, right?
Right.
Like I still have dreams about high school, right? Because of the intense emotions of the period and because it's a time of transition, right?
Right.
I never dream about the last 10 years of my life, because the last 10 years of my life, nothing happened. But I was dreaming about my teenage years because that's a period of great change.
Yeah.
Okay?
So that's interesting because like, I don't dream about my teenage. I don't dream about teenage years.
I wish I didn't.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't. I'm sorry, right?
I know.
But
my recurring dreams are usually that usually like I'm supposed to preach or speak at a church or something or at a conference or something, and they're singing a song, and I know that when that song finishes, they're gonna say my name and I have to jump up there, but I can't find my notes and I don't remember what I'm supposed to talk about, and I have to pee and I can't find a bathroom and the song keeps playing.
Yeah.
And then any second now they're gonna call me. Like that's my recurring thing, which has had nothing to do. I'm sorry, what you're saying.
I actually do have dreams where I'm trying to pass the math test. It's pretty lame, but yeah. So one of the greatest, earliest works of literature is Ovid's Metamorphoses, where he tries to tell the whole history of the world from the beginning until the foundation of Rome. through the motif of transformation.
Yeah.
And throughout the course of your life, as you move forward on the river of time, you change in ways you don't like. Like you're actually deteriorating right now, and it's tough, and it's sad. John Broome and Edmund Hamilton, their stories are fables about the humiliations of being a changeable person. And also, this brings me to my instant classic book, After Hours.
Yes, great book.
Okay. Well, what happened here was I had a book which had a lot of autobiographical stuff in it. And then when I finally got a chance to do another book, I said, I don't want to talk about that, about myself again. So what do? Oh, man.
Yeah, I'm going to get my copy here. I just got to get my copy.
Man, that's awesome. So turn in your book to page, what is that? 27. So then I thought, so one thing that really helped me was my longtime love of the Surrealist movement, not just in painting, but in writing, like people like Mallarmé, Lautréamont, Breton, Apollinaire, where they would have the idea of a poem being a document of its own creation, poem as event. And when you don't know what to write about, it's really liberating. So in this book, I thought, I want to write a poem about me being lonely, because I'm lonely. The problem with that is nobody cares, right? So then I thought, if instead of writing a poem about me being lonely, if instead I made the poem about Superman being lonely, at the very least, the novelty value would encourage the reader to keep on reading until the finish line. And also by that recontextualization, that would possibly make the reader experience new sensations in a funny way.
Yeah.
Which I think I did, right? So basically, this is also an ekphrastic poem, which is a poem based on a previous work of art, normally a painting. So it's called Man of the Year, and it's inspired by the two faces of Superman from Superman 137. Our bloody Superman takes a bow, peeps on the hotties with his X-ray vision. Hard to smile. Kryptonite could be anywhere. He found a cure for aging, squeezed coal into diamonds, pretended it didn't hurt when we forgot to say thank you. The nerve in the howdy doody mask yelling, been there, done that. Confusing dreams of alien life forms. The motiveless hate of the supervillains. Snowballing echoes in his bachelor apartment.
That's so great.
And again, one thing I really recommend for writers, write your thing and then start pruning and like peeling it back and like write down everything you know about your story and then just start erasing and get rid of all the ligaments and assume your writer's not an idiot, because maybe they're not, maybe they can figure it out. And then you put more of the work on their shoulders, and that's when it actually becomes literature and becomes haunting.
Yes.
Like, for example, being lonely, not being able to sleep, that's universal. You get it. So if I just throw these images out there as you're tossing and turning, you get it. You've been there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before where like, for me, writing poetry, I tried to describe at least what made sense to me anyway. Writing poetry was sort of like trying to say something, but without saying it. It's like I'm trying to communicate something, but I can't come right out and say it because that's boring, right? So you have to find these creative ways to communicate the same feelings and ideas in sort of these oblique, ways where if you do it right, people end up, they get the feeling that you're trying to communicate. They get the feeling and the idea that you're trying to communicate, but it's something more like you're leaving them clues and they have to sort of discover it and they have to figure it out. That's what it's always felt like to me. Like I felt like if I did it well, that's kind of what I was shooting for. But your comment about, writing it down and then erasing, I don't know if you know a poet named William Stafford.
Yeah, not very well, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, I love him, and I got to meet
Right
him.
on.
I got to meet him
That's
when I was
awesome.
going to college here in El Paso, UT El Paso, 30
Wow.
years ago. I was my major was creative writing, and I was taking a poetry class, and he was in town. I guess he came and spoke to our poetry class, and he read some of his poems, and he did a Q&A, which was really really cool, honestly, to hear him read some of his poems himself. And that was kind of what he said about his advice for poets was basically don't make any mistakes. And for him, say what you want to say in as few words as you can. Don't use any extra words. I think those were his two bits of advice. Don't use more words than you need to, and don't make any mistakes. And if you do that, that's a great poem. And that seems like really simplistic advice, but it's a lot harder than you think.
Well, also the funny thing about what you were saying there is, on the one hand, we do this all the time. Like,
Right.
for example, if I was to say to you, boy, Wall Street really got hammered today, right?
Yeah.
There's a short street called Wall Street at the bottom of the island of Manhattan. And, I'm not talking about that street,
Right.
right? That's a metonym for the economic system,
Right.
right? And you get it, right?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, this shouldn't be that hard to figure out, but uh, yeah, you'd be surprised how little the reader needs.
Yeah.
It's like the old joke where bad writing is, this is the worst day of my life, he said sadly, right?
That's great. That's perfect. Yes. There you
Right.
go. Because
And
when you as the writer are thinking, how can I make sure my readers understand that this guy has having a bad day? I know.
Right.
I'll have him say, "This day sucks," he said, sadly.
And that's also why John Cheever is a great writer, because you read the story Reunion, and then when it's over, you're like, well, what happened? And then you notice the bit where the father says, son, wait. And the son didn't wait.
Yeah.
He walked away.
Yeah.
And there's no fireworks, there's no special effects, there's no fancy words, but it really hurts.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's that sort of that art of communicating emotion and feeling, but without, you can't directly call it out. You can't like go, here it is right here, right? It's more like it's this indirect thing where as you're reading it, yeah, you're feeling things that aren't verbatim on the page, right? But you can't not get it. You can't not feel it. Yeah, I totally agree. You're making me think. I want maybe in an upcoming episode, I would like to read one of William Stafford's poems, and I think I've told you before. I'd like to read maybe one of my favorite poets, one of his poems.
That sounds great.
It's called "Degrees of Gray in Phillipsburg," and it's doggone it, my stupid brain. What's the guy's name?
It's on the tip of my tongue. I know. Yeah.
Hold on. Degrees of Gray. There it is. Oh, it's by Richard Hugo. That's what I knew it was Hugo something, but I couldn't think of. Okay, Richard Hugo. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, or down the road, maybe we can do that, and you can read some more of your poems too. That would be really great.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, we could talk about this book, and we could probably wrap it up in 20.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. So also today, besides recommending Superman, DC Showcase Presents Superman, Volume 1, 2, 3, 4, Superman Family, Volume 1, 2, 3, we're going to talk about a book called Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson. And it's a great book, and the title comes from the epigraph, and the epigraph comes from the Lou Reed song Heroine. where he says, when I'm rushing on my run and I feel just like Jesus' son, and I guess that I just don't know. So basically, this is a book that everyone should read. Every writer, every aspiring writer should read, just to show you what's possible. And you know how Hemingway and Nabokov are both professional writers, but they're very different. They have different strategies, different styles, right? And so welcome to the party. So in this book, there's a narrator who tells these stories, and it's very stripped down. And once in a while, he will have a metaphor or a simile that is really vivid and really takes your breath away. But beyond that, the language is really stripped down. And the narrator, his name in the book is Fuckhead. And he's a person who's having trouble with addiction, going to rehab, getting out. And because of that, his impressions aren't exactly clear. So, for example, there's a character who's killed off and then comes back later, because that's how memory works. That's how he's remembering it. And it's actually pretty inspiring, because people read Tom Clancy novels, and like my day isn't very much like a Tom Clancy novel, and so it wouldn't be in my best interest to pretend it is, right? And when you're a writer, you have to think about, how can I be honest, right?
Yeah.
And
you're supposed to write what you know. That's the
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like, I like The Godfather, but I'm not Italian. I'm never going to be. That's not my thing, right? And it was Mario Puzo's thing, where it just poured out of him, right? Yeah. And you have to find your thing, right? And like, I see on YouTube, they have ads for a master class where they say, you can learn how to write thrillers like Dan Brown. And I'm like, good Lord, why would I want to? I don't want to be Dan Brown. I want to be me, right? So it's just kind of inspiring to see in this book about how the narrator is a guy who is having these problems, and you get it, and he doesn't fill in the blanks for you, but you also sort of process this out later. So it's very stripped down, very short book, but it will really haunt you. And it's kind of funny. Dennis Johnson, and this book was it's very influential in the literary world. And Dennis Johnson once said he was a Christian, and then kind of backpedaled on that, because people sort of, he didn't want to be pigeonholed as a Christian writer and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And he once said something like, forget I said that. And he said, I don't know why the search for God keeps appearing in my writing. It just does. I wish it didn't, right? And I'd venture to say that the reason the search for God appears in his novels is because he's a good writer. And if you're a good writer, eventually you have to face up to the fact that we're hungry for more than dopamine hits.
Yeah.
And that there are certain questions that haunted Homer that will still haunt us, and all that fun stuff.
Yes.
So this is a story from Jesus' son, and it's called Dun Dun. I went out to the farmhouse where Dun Dun lived to get some pharmaceutical opium from him, but I was out of luck. He greeted me as he was coming out into the front yard to go to the pump, wearing new cowboy boots and a leather vest, with his flannel shirt hanging out over his jeans. He was chewing on a piece of gum. McInnes isn't feeling too good today. I just shot him. You mean killed him? I didn't mean to. Is he really dead? No, he's sitting down. But he's alive. Oh, sure, he's alive. He's sitting down now in the back room. Dun Dun went on over to the pump and started working the handle. I went around the house and in through the back. The room just through the back door smelled of dogs and babies. Beetle stood in the opposite doorway. She watched me come in. Leaning against the wall was Blue, smoking a cigarette and scratching her chin thoughtfully. Jack Hotel was over at an old desk. setting fire to a pipe, the bowl of which was wrapped in tinfoil. When they saw it was only me, the three of them resumed looking at McInnes, who sat on the couch all alone, with his left hand resting gently on his belly. Dun shot him? I asked. Somebody shot him, Hotel said. Dun came in behind me, carrying some water in a china cup and a bottle of beer, and said to McInnes, "Here." "I don't want that," McInnes said. "Okay, well, here then." Dun offered him the rest of his beer. "No, thanks." I was worried. "Aren't you taking him to a hospital or anything?" "Good idea," Beadle said sarcastically. "We started to," Hotel explained, "but we ran into the corner of the shed out there." I looked out the side window. This was Tim Bishop's farm. Tim Bishop's Plymouth, I saw, which was a very nice old gray and red sedan, had sideswiped the shed and replaced one of the corner posts so that the post lay on the ground, and the car now held up the shed's roof. "The front windshield is in millions of bits," Hotel said. "How'd you end up way over there?" "Everything was completely out of hand," Hotel said. "Where's Tim, anyway?" "He's not here," Beadle said. Hotel passed me the pipe. It was hashish, but it was pretty well burned up already. "How you doing?" Dun asked McInnes. "I can feel it, right here. It's just stuck in the muscle." Dun said, "It's not bad. The cap didn't explode right, I think." "It misfired?" "It misfired a little bit, yeah." Hotel asked me, "Would you take him to the hospital in your car?" "Okay," I said. "I'm coming too," Dun said. "Have you got any of the opium left?" I asked him. "No," he said. "That was a birthday present. I used it all up." "When's your birthday?" I asked him. "Today." "You shouldn't have used it all up before your birthday then," I told him angrily. But I was happy about this chance to be of use. I wanted to be the one who saw it through and got McInnes to the doctor without a wreck. People would talk about it, and I hoped I would be liked. In the car were Dun, McInnes, and myself. This was Dun's 21st birthday. I'd met him in the Johnson County facility during the only few days I'd ever spent in jail, around the time of my 18th Thanksgiving. I was the older of us by a month or two. As for McInnes, he'd been around forever. And in fact, I myself was married to one of his old girlfriends. We took off as fast as I could go without bouncing the shooting victim around too heavily. Dun said, "What about the brakes? You got them working?" "The emergency brake does. That's enough." "What about the radio?" Dun punched the button, and the radio came on, making an emission like a meat grinder. He turned it off and then on, and now it burbled like a machine that polishes stones all night. "How about you?" I asked McInnes. "Are you comfortable?" "What do you think?" McInnes said. It was a long, straight road through dry fields as far as a person could see. You would think the sky didn't have any air in it, and the earth was made of paper. Rather than moving, we were just getting smaller and smaller. What can be said about those fields? There were blackbirds circling above their own shadows, and beneath them, the cows stood around, smelling one another's butts. Dun spat his gum out the window while digging in his shirt pocket for his Winstons. He lit a Winston with a match. That was all there was to say. "We'll never get off this road," I said. What a lousy birthday, Dundon said. McInnes was white and sick, holding himself tenderly. I'd seen him like that once or twice, even when he hadn't been shot. He had a bad case of hepatitis that often gave him a lot of pain. Do you promise not to tell them anything? Dundon was talking to McInnes. I don't think he hears you, I said. Tell them it was an accident, okay? McInnes said nothing for a long moment. Finally, he said, okay. Promise? Dundon said. But McInnes said nothing because he was dead. Dundon looked at me with tears in his eyes. What do you say? What do you mean, what do I say? Do you think I'm here because I know all about this stuff? He's dead. All right, I know he's dead. Throw him out of the car. Damn right, throw him out of the car, I said. I'm not taking him anywhere now. For a moment, I fell asleep, right while I was driving. I had a dream in which I was trying to tell someone something, and they kept interrupting. A dream about frustration. I'm glad he's dead, I told Dundon. He's the one who started everybody calling me fuckhead. Dundon said, don't let it get you down. We whizzed along down through the skeleton remnants of Iowa. I wouldn't mind working as a hitman, Dundon said. Glaciers had crushed this region in the time before history. There had been a drought for years, and a bronze fog of dust stood over the plains. The soybean crop was dead again, and the failed wilted corn stalks were laid out on the ground like rows of underthings. Most of the farmers didn't even plant anymore. All the false visions had been erased. It felt like the moment before the Savior comes. And the Savior did come, but we had to wait a long time. Dundon tortured Jack Hotel at the lake outside of Denver. He did this to get information about a stolen item, a stereo belonging to Dundon's girlfriend, or perhaps to his sister. Later, Dundon beat a man almost to death with a tire iron right on the street in Austin, Texas, for which he'll someday have to answer. But now he is, I think, in the state prison in Colorado. Will you believe me when I tell you there was kindness in his heart? His left hand didn't know what his right hand was doing. It was only that certain important connections had been burned through. If I opened up your head and ran a hot soldering iron around in your brain, I might turn you into someone like that.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'd never heard of that book before. That's really good. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so what stands out to you in that story?
First off, because, I like to write myself, there's certain inside baseball pleasures of just going, wow, I see what he's doing here, and he kind of pulled it off. Kudos.
Yeah.
But also, I like the way he plays with memory. Like, how in Proust, he has that piece of coffee cake, and suddenly it reminds him of something from his childhood, and he goes off in this million-word rant about, these impressions coming back to him. So in this book, the way characters come in and out, like, do you ever have a conversation with your wife where it's like, we took a vacation here in 2003, and then later we went here in 2007. And it's like, no, it was the other way around. I'm like, really? it was. Okay, right. And then if I try to make sense of your life, like how much of it do you actually remember, right? And it's a little cliche where like as you get older, like your memories of 1986 get more vivid. But if I asked you, what did you do last Wednesday, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so uh, I think you know, like I'm a big fan of Conrad about how he would have all these strategies to create screens between the reader and the truth. And you think like an author wouldn't want that, but as a serious thinker, Conrad was trying to make a point about what is knowable. So these barriers about language barriers, cultural barriers, the passage of time between the reader and the incident that the page is supposed to tell you about was part of his strategy of saying about how about how much of the truth is actually graspable by an individual in this moment.
Yeah.
And how much and how much is not known, is not knowable, right?
Yeah.
So for me, in a story like that, I just like how, first off, it's really admirable how, Dennis Johnson knows when to shut up, right? Like when you start writing, you make a list of all these like pretty phrases. And it's so sad because on the one hand, it's like, look at me, I'm writing, I'm a writer. I thought of something clever, right?
Right.
And you think of some metaphor that's killer, like, oh man, I can't wait to use it, right?
Yeah.
But a little of that goes a long way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in this book, Dennis Johnson will have a metaphor or an image that really knocks you out every 3 or 4 pages.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, like being a writer, it's not like being a plumber. Like a plumber is binary. Like it's leaking. I want you to make it stop leaking. And if it stops leaking, you're a good plumber, and if not, you're a bad plumber, right? And in art, there's different ways to try to document a moment, something human, something true. And what I like about this story is just, hey, people should know you can, here's something that's like doable. It's like, I remember when I was starting out, it wasn't so much that I would copy writers, but I would read a writer and go, oh, wow. Now I know this is possible, right?
Yeah.
Like when I was in my 20s, I'm like, I notice these things. I'm concerned about ABC. I want to say it this way, but are you allowed to do that? And I've just encountered some art where it really seemed to like break down barriers. And like, oh yeah, full speed ahead, go for it, right?
Yeah.
And again, the way the narrative voice kind of comes in and out of the story.
Yeah.
Like in the story Rothschild's Fiddle, on the one hand, the narrative voice is very much Chekhovian, where it's supposed to be flat, right?
Yeah.
Like Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, right?
Right.
But then you will also get, but then somehow the narrator also hates the same things Bronze hates. You get his impressions of the willows and some of his, sensory data.
Yeah, the narrator
right?
is in the head of the character, and so you get those details bleeding out. So it's not just an impartial person telling you a story that they're observing. They're also aware of what that person is thinking at that moment and feeling at that moment, and it comes through without saying. And he was thinking this, right? It kind of bleeds through as the narrator's describing what's the trees and the ducks and whatever else. The Rothschild, not Rothschild, but what's the character's name?
Bronze. Bronze.
Bronze's feelings about those things bleeds through the narrator's description. And we talked about that in that episode about how it's really interesting the way he does that in a very subtle way.
Yeah, just like Joseph Conrad has one book I remember where it's on a ship, he's talking about these sailors, and then it isn't until page 50 or 60 that he says something like, it was the worst storm I'd ever seen, and then suddenly you're like, oh, the narrator, who seemed like impartial and above it all, he's actually a shipmate. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Right? And, you know, when you're a reader, you just really relish those moments of being startled and saying, oh, I have to prick up my ears and pay closer attention, right?
Yeah.
And so Jesus' Son is just a really good primer for any writer, you know, to be like, oh, wow, you know, if you say to someone, do you want to read a book about drug addicts and rehab? You'll be like, hell no. First off, because most people have feelings of snobbery towards those kind of people.
Yeah.
And also because stories like that tend to be pretty cliched.
And also really dreary and dark and depressing.
Yeah. So, and in Jesus' Son, it's everything that happens there is are things that either happened to the author or happened to people he knew, but he just sort of arranged them in such a way where it isn't your typical rehab kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'd say the main thing is about like, I'm just interested in like memory, the passage of time. And yeah, it's like when you read Rothschild's Fiddle the first time around, you're like, praise the Lord, I'm glad to know something this awesome exists, right? Like, what a shock, right? And like, you read stories that suck, or you've watched TV shows where you figure out the ending 15 minutes before, right?
Yeah, I hate that. Yeah.
You know? Yeah, not just Matlock, because that happens with every Matlock.
That's right, of course.
You know, where the guy was on the witness stand on Matlock, and it's like 5 minutes to go. He's the guy, right?
Right, and he, of course, confesses everything, right? Like all those cop shows where that happens, where the way the thing is solved is they've got the guy in the room with the light on his face, interrogating him, and they got you, and then he just tells you everything, and you're like, what an idiot. And that's not just one idiot, it's every episode where they do. Like, I think every episode of Bones was that way. Where like, that's the wrap up, is they caught the guy and they got him in the interrogation room and he just tells you everything, confesses the whole thing. Cuff him.
Actually, I have some good advice for all the murderers listening to this podcast. Okay. And this will work. Okay. There was a TV show called The First 48, and it shows like a murder happens, and basically the idea is that when a murder happens, if the police don't make an arrest in the first 48 hours, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Okay. And what happens is they use these like terrible torture techniques to make the person confess. So they confess, right? So if you kill someone, just lawyer up and don't say anything, and you'll get away with murder.
Yeah.
Right. Also, what I learned from Quincy, do you know how on Matlock, he's supposed to be a defense lawyer, but he defends his client by proving out who the real killer is?
Right. Of course, that's how you do it, right?
Right. So basically, the TV show Quincy, the premise of the show is that police officers are fat, lazy scumbags
who can't solve crimes.
Yeah, and they've never solved a crime. So what happens is, on every Quincy, they find a corpse, and the cop says, "Ooh, it looks like he died of natural causes," right? And then Quincy says, "What are you talking about? There's a knife in his back. He was murdered, I tell you."
Yeah.
And then Lieutenant Monahan says, "Quincy, if you say this is a murder, I'm going to have to do paperwork. I'm going to have to walk around and do stuff and type, talk to people. Why do you have to be like this?
Why do you make it so hard, man? Fill out the paperwork, say it's an accident, and let's move on."
Just go with the flow. And if you say he died of natural causes, I promise I'll buy you beer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Quincy's like, no, I think this was a murder, and I'm going to find the real killers. And the cop's like, good luck with that, buddy, finding criminals.
Like,
Like that happened,
we're not going to help you.
right? The whole point is of Quincy, cops are lazy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So one time my wife was working for a winery where they imported barrels of grapes, and then people could buy the crushed grapes to make wine at their homes. And then so she was working with these people, and she'd come home and say, "Wow, my boss has a really positive attitude. She's always going go go go, faster faster, screaming." And then we found out they were arrested for cocaine trafficking.
Uh-huh.
So that might have been why she was so enthusiastic, right?
Right.
So what happened was the cop said, we are charging you with being cocaine traffickers. And then we're like, cocaine? You're going to shut down this business that employs 18 people and make them unemployed for what? Right?
Yeah.
So then the husband and wife who own this winery, they went to court and said, that cocaine in that bin wasn't mine. I thought it was pineapple juice. I had a buddy who was shipping stuff under my label, and I just did that to him as a favor, okay? And this guy said, I didn't know there was cocaine in there, and he couldn't read English. They were from Portugal, right? So he said, so the Crown, Queen Elizabeth charged him with like smuggling millions of dollars of cocaine. And he went to court and said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know what cocaine is. And you can't prove I did it. And they're still in business.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
because the Crown said, ooh, this might require detective work. Forget it.
Right.
So if you kill someone, just lawyer up.
Yeah. All right. Write that down, kids. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
I was gonna real quick. This is a tangent. I know we want to wrap it up a little bit here, but I want to say, like, you're thinking about in the story, going back to you're saying the story about the unreliability of memory and all that stuff. There's a really fascinating thing about that. I remember the first time I came across this. I think it was actually it was a book. It's actually a pretty good book. Which of course I can't think of the name of it at the moment, but it was a science fiction film. Maybe it'll come to me in a second, maybe. Science fiction film, science fiction book, first time author, and it was a really good book, especially for a first time author. But there's a part in the book where they're talking about the unreliability of memory and how, and the way one of the characters explains to the other person. He says, he makes a statement. He goes, all of your memories, everyone's memories are manufactured. And the guy's like, no, they're not. What are you talking about? I remember being a kid, and I was playing out as a kid, and I had to ride my bike. And so the guy says, okay, close your eyes. Okay, go back to that memory you're talking about. You're a kid riding your bike, on your childhood home. Remember that? Yeah. Do you see it? Yeah. Do you see yourself riding the bike? Yeah. That's how you know you manufactured it. Your brain makes a movie of the memory in your head. Because if it was a memory, it would be a first person. You would see your hands on the handlebars. You'd look down and see your feet pushing the pedals. But in your memory, you are over here standing, watching yourself as a kid, and you see yourself riding a bike. That's not your memory. That's a film of your memory your brain made to save it in your archive, in your storage bank. And I was like, damn, he's right. Because so many of my memories, that's what they are. I close my eyes, and when I think of what happened when I was young, or even a couple of years ago, the memory is I'm seeing myself from outside my body doing it. So what that is my brain made a little movie for me to remember that event, which is really fascinating. So like you were saying, when you can't remember, we went on vacation here. Was it here? Was it there? How did it happen? Maybe you're telling a story with your spouse, and then this happened, and then that happened. And they go, no, it didn't. It happened this other way. And you both argue. And the thing is, neither one of you knows what really happened. Because you each made your own little movie, and you each, or you directed your own version of that memory in your own head, but neither one of you knows which is what actually happened. The other thing, also to test that theory, there's actually I think there was a TED Talk where someone was talking about, had done research on memory. And they did this experiment where they took 50 people and they had them tell a story of a memory when they were a kid. And they filmed it. And then every year, or maybe every couple of years, they would interview the person again and ask them to tell the same story. Tell us again about that memory. And they did this for like 10 years. And when you go back and watch the same person telling the same memory, every time they tell the story of the memory, they add a detail or they remove a detail, but they're absolutely convinced this is exactly the way it happened.
Yeah.
Right. So again, every time you remember it, you might add another detail, embellish a certain part of it, emphasize another part of it, or remove a detail. And so what they did after this 10 years, they went back and asked the person again after 10 years, tell us the story again. Then they went back and played the very first memory from 10 years ago of themselves, watching a video of themselves telling the story, and it's different. And they're like, they can't believe it. Like, well, what am I doing? Why didn't I left that part out? And why didn't I? Oh, I don't remember that. And it's sort of like being faced with your own actual self telling you the memory and noticing how it changes over time. That's another part of it. Like, well, we edit as we go. That's another reason why your memories are very unreliable.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not a fan of certain paint by numbers novels where problems get solved at the end or people get saved, because that's just not how life works. Like, I think life is more like a Marc Chagall or a Kurlek collage, than it is like a Tom Clancy novel.
Exactly.
Also, look at how, it's funny, when we were kids on TV shows, people would always say, that's just circumstantial evidence. And they'd always use this phrase on TV. They'd say circumstantial evidence, right?
Yeah.
Where I think he was the murderer because he was in the neighborhood or something. Like, oh no, that's just circumstantial.
Right.
And they were implying that eyewitness testimony is preferable. When actually, if you talk to a Crown prosecutor, they'll say, holy Lord, eyewitness testimony, no thanks.
Right, it's the most unreliable.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
And they've had cases of like bank robbers where they interview 4 people afterwards and say, how did the bank robbers leave? And they'll disagree, not just on like minor details, but one person will say black Buick, one person says a pink Jeep.
Yep.
Right? Because you know how like you process and store memories different when you're under trauma.
Right.
All these things, right? So like, and it's so funny. If you have a crime in a courtroom and there's 4 witnesses whose testimony all agree, you don't go, oh, wow, this is great. No, you go, oh, no, I have a big problem.
They collaborated. They talked to each other and worked out their story. Yeah.
They're lying because welcome to Earth. That's not how it works,
Yeah, no, that same. I'll see if I can find the link when this episode posts. Maybe we can put it in the comments or something. But the same TED Talk that I had seen about memory. Again, they were doing research on memory, and they did another experiment where. So they had to use the collaboration of the subjects, like parents, wife, best friend, and people like that. And they all had to be in on it. So what they did was they got all these people around this person, and they got them to agree. You're all going to tell a story. We're all going to get together for dinner, and you're all going to tell a story about this person who's the subject, and you're all going to tell a story about a memory, from like a long time ago, when this person did something that they did not do. We're going to make up something that never, ever happened. But you're all going to swear, oh no, remember we drove here and we did this and you met this person and then this happened. And then the other person's going to corroborate. Yeah, I remember that. Oh, I laughed so hard. And you're all going to tell the story about the memory that never happened and see how they react. And damn it, every time they did it, at first, the person says, no, that never happened. No, I wasn't there. No, I don't remember that. But as they keep going and they keep adding more specific details, the person starts going, oh yeah, I remember that. And then this happened. And now all of a sudden they're telling you they remember something only because everybody else insisted that it
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, sure.
And now you can't convince them it isn't real. That was the other crazy thing. When they finally revealed to them, by the way, that never happened. They're like, oh no, it did. I remember. Because you literally, it's like Inception. You really have convinced the person because now they say, no, I've got that memory. I remember that day, even though it never happened. And that's what's really scary is how easy it is to manipulate people into saying, oh no, I remember that. And you can't convince them otherwise.
Well, it's funny. There have been all sorts of experiments like that about suggestibility, and there was a famous one where they'd have an experiment where everyone was in on it except one guy, where the person doing the experiment would flash 3 geometrical shapes or something and say which one is biggest, and they'd say is A biggest when it wasn't, and everyone but this one guy would put up his hand, and then the first couple of times it happens. He's like, what? And then eventually, as it goes on, his resolve weakens until he puts up his hands too.
Yes.
Right? And it's really wild.
Yeah, that kind of thing, by the way, happens. That I've seen other experiments where they'll do these social experiments where like a person goes into a doctor's office and there's, chairs in the waiting room. But when the guy goes into the waiting room, everyone is standing up. No one is sitting in a chair. And at first he'll walk in, he notices everyone is standing. And so he doesn't sit down. He stands up too. And it's like, it's one of these unnatural things. Well, like normally you go to a waiting room, there's a chair you have a long wait. There's like 10 people in front of you. Just sit down. Why don't you sit down? Well, because he sees everybody else standing up, he stands up, right? Because he would be the only one not standing up. They've also done experiments too, where like you push a door for the elevator opens and everyone in the elevator is facing the back. And you'll get in and face the back too. Why am I doing this? This is insane. Well, you're doing it because everybody else is doing it and you don't want to be the one who's not also doing it, right? So those kinds of things, we definitely do bow to social pressures, and it'll make us do stupid things, dumb things you would think, I would never do that. Yes, you would, because it's very difficult to resist this social pressure.
See, and for me, the thing is, what do you do with that information? Like when you know this thing about the treachery of memory and how we lie to ourselves to avoid pain. Yeah. And we're so suggestible and all this stuff. Like, I think that would suggest, hey, maybe I should learn the art of humility, right? Uh-huh. But it used to be the only place you could learn humility is in church, and no one goes to church anymore. Right. So we now have this society where it will reward you to be envious, fearful, arrogant, all these things, but you can't learn how to be humble anywhere, right? It's like, I noticed that I have strong political views, okay? Yeah. And I notice that I have strong political views and that they're totally different than the political views I had 15 years ago. Yeah. Right? So what does that mean? I think it means that my opinions probably aren't worth stabbing you over. Right? Right, because they could change. Maybe we should tread lightly. Right? Yes, yes. But we now have engineered a society where the idea of treading lightly would never occur because, it's just so easy to write someone off if they don't follow, the script or whatever. So, and of course, that's one thing art is really good for, like showing things that don't change, showing these, our fallibility and all this, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I'm one of my next books is going to be on this question, on this idea of embracing mystery. And that's one of the key things, what you're talking about right there is we've become a society where we believe that the most important thing in the world is to be right. And we have to prove we're right and everybody else is wrong. But that need to be right, it creates all kinds of problems, right? So it ignores the reality, like you said, that,
Well, my ideas have changed about politics or theology or lots of things. And so, yeah, maybe it's not worth stabbing you over what I believe today, because what I believe today could be different from what I believe tomorrow. And so that's one side of it. But the other side of it is that the more we are convinced that we're right and everyone else is wrong, it just kind of, it kills curiosity. It kills any sense of wonder. It kills any sense of humility, like you said, of like, hey, maybe I'm wrong about something. Maybe I have something to learn. Maybe you have something to tell me that I don't already know, right? But I can't receive it if I'm convinced I'm right and you're wrong. And as long as I'm stuck in that mode, there's no sense of mystery. There's no sense of curiosity or wonder or awe or any of those things. And especially when it comes to theology, I think that's pretty essential. I think you can't approach the idea of talking about God when God is by definition of being completely beyond description or understanding or language. It just transcends everything. And so for you, what's the dumbest thing you could possibly say is, I got God figured out. I know I'm right about God and you're wrong.
People say that.
They do. And there's no statement in the universe more stupid and demonstrably false than that. I know about God and I'm right and you're wrong. Yeah, maybe about some other topics, but not about God.
I wonder why I keep mentioning this. It seems like this is how people like to slow down and when they see a train wreck or something. John MacArthur says that. Like, he knows he's right.
Oh yes, he does. That is the problem. Yeah. So it's actually I'm getting ready to, like, I'm writing the book right now and trying to find examples of this kind of thing. And I don't know.
First off, what's funny is, like, if you think, wow, I notice my views on X have changed since 2005, right? That's weird. I defined myself in 2005 by these things, and now they're gone, right?
That's right.
Also, who would I be without my specific wife, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Which leads you to wonder, what is a self, right? And what if the idea of selfhood is a scam? Okay. Yeah. Now, before the Russian Revolution, my family lived in a certain spot and they didn't travel, and they got an identity from their relatives and from their dirt, and that was their life, and they were fine. And they didn't have existential crises. They didn't want to self-actualize and find themselves and run away and all this stuff. And it seems like once you have this idea of the primacy of the self, especially in a certain sort of non-sacred arena, it leads to selfishness.
Yes.
And once you make people more selfish, you can make money. So you know how they say follow the money, right?
Yeah.
You think you're a self and you have opinions and you're right, but what if that's a scam you've been taught to make people money?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, people do.
It's like, yeah.
It's probably a good idea for you to notice that people do. And then now why? Think about that for a minute. Are you now a pawn? Are you now a sucker because you've fallen for something? And it's one thing to say, well, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. But once you realize it, that should make you really reconsider and rethink what you think you know and what you think you're doing and why you're really doing it. Because there is a little bit of manipulation going on there, where there's billion-dollar industries out there, marketing and sales and politics and all these kind of things that exist only because they've gotten really good at manipulating people like you.
Sure. It's like, you know how George Bush said they hate our freedom.
Right.
Right. And what that means is, like, You can go to Walmart and choose from 30 different kinds of cereals,
Oh, yeah.
right? Meanwhile, my grandparents just had oatmeal that they made themselves, right? They weren't free to choose Count Chocula.
Yes.
They had the same oatmeal every day. They weren't free to choose Trix.
Right. Or Lucky
You
Charms,
know?
or yeah.
Yeah. So
Candy
that's
cane.
freedom. And once you have this non-transcendent, non-sacred idea of selfhood, it's like, oh, you mean selflessness in
Yes.
fancy words. I know what that is, you know.
Yeah.
And also, then of course, once you have this situation, it's not surprising that someone would be like, well, I feel kind of adrift. What else can I do except prove that I'm right? Right?
Yeah.
I'll acquire knowledge or technical skill to get a leg up and be sure that I'm right.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that is literally impossible.
Yeah. That's right.
Right? And this whole thing about humility, that wasn't a virtue because, you know, those bishops got a kick from pushing you down. It's because it's accurate.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Very true.
Yeah.
This is good stuff, man. It's really funny. Well, we started off with Superman and where we ended up. So this is really cool.
Sure. Great.
Yeah. Another good episode. Lots to think
Yeah.
about, lots to check out. All right, man. Thanks a lot, Darrell.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks everyone for listening. See you next time.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.